Hello, everyone, and welcome to our information webinar on the top private schools in the Peninsula part of the Bay Area. I see some people are still trickling in, but as they do, we'll just give a little brief introduction before we get started. So this information webinar should last about 35 to 40 minutes, and then afterwards we will have our Q&A session at the end. Yes, a little information about myself. My name is Kate Pistelnik. I currently work at Think Academy, and I also have Judy Lee next to me, who also works at Think Academy, and she will be helping with the Q&A session at the end. One of the things that we've been working on at Think Academy over the last few years, besides providing supplemental math classes to K through 8 students, as well as math competition help, is doing research on private schools and public schools in the Bay Area and gathering feedback from parents and students on how they like the schools and their characteristics. And that makes webinars like this possible. We've also been doing our own research ourselves based off the school databases and information that the schools provide us. So it's a little information on us. Like I said, if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to just type a question in the chat box and we'll get to it at the end. And then lastly, before we get started, we do have a Facebook group called Bay Area Schools and Parents Discussion. So if you would like to scan the QR code and join that group, because we do provide information on both private schools and public schools, such as academic statistics, key characteristics, and more. So if you need any help regarding schools in the Bay Area, you can scan that QR code down below and join. But if you didn't scan it yet, that's totally okay. We will be able to have that QR code up at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. So thank you all for being here, and let's get into our first slide. So the school, kind of how this breakdown is going to go, is that we're going to introduce each school individually and give a brief introduction on each school and their basic information, and as well, and then we're also going to cover key characteristics of each individual school, what makes them special in comparison to the other schools, and then as well as feedback from parents or common questions from parents that they had regarding each school. And hopefully that will be helpful. And then after we're done covering every single school individually, we will have our own comparison statistics where we'll be able to compare each school side by side in different academic categories to help you get a little bit more information on each school and see which one you prefer. And then obviously we'll have the Q&A session at the end. And the schools that we will be covering today, we have 5. They're obviously all in the Peninsula area. We have Nueva, Menlo, Pinewood, Crystal Springs, and Synapse. There was a bunch of other schools in the Peninsula area that we could have covered as well, such as Sacred Heart, Castalia, Peninsula School, but we do only have time for 5 schools. So we picked these schools based off of parents' feedback and how much interest there are in those schools, as well as obviously the academic numbers. But we felt that if the parents were wanting to learn the most about these 5 schools, that this webinar would be the most helpful. But we can definitely cover those other schools like Castalia, like Sacred Heart, like Peninsula in future webinars as well. But we will now get into our first slide. And so our first slide is talking about Nueva. So a brief introduction about Nueva is that one key characteristic, they do have an emphasis on IQ tests and personalized classes. We will definitely get into that more in the next couple slides. But more for their brief information, there's 2 campuses for Nueva. One is in Hillsborough and the other one is in San Mateo. The teacher to student ratio is currently 1:5, and 80% of teachers hold advanced degrees. For their main grade entrance, it is kindergarten, grade 9, and grade 6. And just to give a little breakdown on their admission numbers, last year, about 20 students were admitted for kindergarten, 20 to 25 were admitted for G6, and about 45 were admitted for G9, grade 9. So as you can see, a lot of students were admitted for grade 9, but there is also a lot more applications as well. And then for their tuition breakdown, currently for pre-K, their tuition is $31,780. And then for grades K through 4, it is $40,000 exactly. And then for grades 5 through 12, it jumps up to $53,350. Now for their 2019 and 2020 UC admission rates for UC Berkeley and UCLA. When you look at UC Berkeley, there was really no change from 2019 to 2020. It's 28.95%, and then it dropped about 0.5% to 28.3%, which is very impressive based off the schools that we've looked at, both private and public in the Bay Area. A lot of schools definitely see a drop in UC Berkeley admission from 2019 to 2020, but the fact that it stayed relatively the same is very impressive. And then for UCLA, there was no information from the official UC admission database for 2019 UCLA, but for 2020, Nueva's admission rate was 25.5%. So now this next slide, we're going to talk about one of the key characteristics of Nueva, which is information on their IQ test. And so for their IQ test, it is required for students who are entering pre-K to grade 8. Students who are under 6 take the WPPIS-IV or Roman numeral 5, and then students over 6 take the WISEV or Roman numeral 5. The IQ test, it can be taken through the school or at another professional outside institution. A little bit of price breakdown for each. If you're going to go through the school, it's $350 for students under 6, and then over 6, it is $450. That's based off their official website. For an outside location, it will be more expensive. It'll run you at about $1,000. Their test for the outside location is a little more in-depth. You'll get a little bit more information from the test, but it does cost a lot more. And then one characteristic about the IQ test that is important is that no preparation for the IQ test is allowed. If the spotters or the people who are administering the test do kind of see that the kid has been briefed on this information before, your admission application will not be accepted. So make sure that there is no preparation prior, because the school does want to make sure that the kid or the students are going in cold so that they can better assess their IQ score. And then lastly, the cutoff line for the IQ test at Nueva is 130. However, from parents that we have talked to, based off their feedback, they do realize that only around like 2% of students are admitted with a score of 130. The sweet spot for Nueva's IQ score is around 135 to 140. So that is just something to keep in mind. Below, we have a graph of average IQ test scores. So as you can see, majority of people that take the IQ test score between that 85 to 115 range. Only about 2% of people that take the IQ test will score in that 130 or more range. So hopefully that's some helpful information on their IQ test. Since applications are going on, we do have some important upcoming due dates and events for Nueva for right now. The application season started around September 1st, but the due date is January 6th. And for grades 1 through 8, the off-campus IQ test date is January 14th. There's a lot of dates here that may be a little confusing, so hopefully this helps. And the pre-K through K off-campus IQ test date is January 28th. Now, they have separate due dates for on-campus IQ tests if you are G5 through 8. If you've taken an on-campus IQ test, the due date is January 14th. And then for pre-K through grade 4, the on-campus IQ test due date is around early February. They didn't specify exactly when, it's just said early February. However, the one key point for the on-campus IQ test date is that test spots usually fill up pretty quickly around early December. So if you haven't scheduled the IQ test the IQ test on campus yet, I would do so within the next week because it does fill up by early December. For other dates, the parent guardian form is due on January 6th as well. And then for the virtual parent guardian interview, that will be scheduled after your test is submitted and reviewed. They will send you an update, making sure to schedule that very quickly afterwards. And then lastly, for the ongoing events, the virtual program review, they are having that right now, as well as the parent guardian and guided tour. And lastly, the in-person activity session that is held on campus that will also be done after testing results are received and reviewed. So hopefully this is a little bit helpful information on their upcoming due dates and events, but now we'll get into some of their key characteristics for Nueva. So starting off, they do have a lot of personalized classes where students who are, say, gifted in English or math, or they excel at English and math, their pathway will be more geared towards the subject that they excel at. So if they're gifted at English, they'll have a schedule that's more focused on English, and then math, vice versa. And these personalized classes are because they want to make sure that the students have more of a one-on-one education with the teachers. They feel that that helps them excel more. They also implement project-based learning to do this too. And so the fact that there are personalized classes at Nueva, that also means that there's also no standard textbooks. It is all personalized for whatever the student's academic needs are. And then another key point is that there are no exams until grade 9. Instead, they implement a no pass system. The only test that they do take that isn't for a grade, it's just a personalized academic assessment, is done via the Educational Records Bureau, ERB. That's a test that's given out from grade 3, and it basically just contains a personalized assessment of their academics and performance for the parents to see how they are progressing throughout their academic path. And then lastly, they do have a very detailed SEL program because Nueva does believe that with kids who are going to the school, they do believe are gifted because of the IQ tests that they give. And although they may be gifted and excel in academic topics like English or math, they may not have the communication skills developed yet to communicate with other students. So that's why they have the detailed SEL program, or social emotional learning, to make sure that the kids are learning how to communicate well with the other students, especially with conflicts and debates that can happen during class. They will teach students to, instead of say, you're right, I'm wrong, they will teach the student to say, hey, that is a very good point that you make. However, this is what I believe. And this all to help them develop their real world communication skills that will help them in life on top of the academics as well. So that's a little bit about Nueva's characteristics, but we're now going to move in to some parents Q&A, which is some common questions that parents have asked us about. And so the first one is how to apply. The application is all done through Ravenna online. You can obviously create an account and then start your application process there. As we said, they are due January 6th. And then also, what do parents need to prepare? One thing that's very important for parents in order to prepare is their parent interview. And during the parent interview, they focus a lot on the educational ideology and philosophy of the parent. So they want to make sure essentially that the philosophy or ideology of the parent does match with the school, so that there's no conflict down the road, and there is no there's no conflict with the school and with the parent. So make sure that if your academic ideology lines up with Nueva, that will definitely be a positive thing for the parent interview, because if there's no conflict between the two sides, the child's education path will be a little bit more smooth. And then the third question is how to be more competitive. And so one way that a child can be more competitive during their application process is if they're glad to express themselves during the shadow day. The shadow day is essentially during the application process. Students will know what it's like to have a day in the life at Nueva. And during that shadow day, make sure to express a key unique factor of the student, talent, leadership skills is definitely really, really important. And just be special, be excellent, and be passionate, because that will definitely help during the shadow day and make the child stand out. So that is it for the first school, which is Nueva, but let's now move into our second school. And so our second school is Menlo School. So a little brief introduction about Menlo. One key factor that we have heard from parents is that it is a little bit more difficult to get into without inside connections. We'll get more into that in the parent feedback. We have some quotes regarding that. The address is in Atherton, and the main grade entrance is 6 and 9. It is a school that is for grades 6 through 12. There is no elementary or lower school. The teacher to student ratio is 1 to 6, and then their tuition is pretty much the same as Nueva's 5 through 12 tuition range, just about, I would say, about $800 more a year. It's at $53,000. $80 more, 53,430, my mistake. And then the average GPA unweighted is 3.97. So that is the GPA when you don't include for AP courses. And then for more basic information, about 75% of teachers hold advanced degrees. And then for the 2019 and 2020 UC admission rates for UC Berkeley, about 18% were admitted in 2019. And then that number went up by about 1% to 19.7% in 2020. So the increase is definitely good. And then for UCLA, you definitely saw an increase as well by even more, 7% from 12.66 in 2019 to 19.72 in 2020. Next, we're going to cover the key characteristics of Menlo. And so to start off, they do have an emphasis on sports and arts. More information on this, around 100% of their students participate in creative arts during high school. Some creative arts classes that they do offer are studio art, graphic art, photography, orchestra, jazz, chamber music, chorus, movie making, dance, drama, and percussion. So as you can see, they definitely have a lot of niche and specific creative arts classes for students to get interested in and take while they are at Menlo. And then for sports, 80% of upper school students play at least one sport. And more information on some of their sports success. They've had over the past 5 years, won 16 Central Coast Section or CCS championships and 11 CCS Scholastic Team Championships. Basically, a CCS Scholastic Team Championship is a team that has the highest cumulative GPA. So they definitely care about academics and sports in combination. For their STEM-focused and personalized programs, there are two STEM-focused ones that were definitely worth noting. They have an applied science research program, or ASR, where students are able to design, do experiments, and analyze data. They work on campus, or they can either intern at a local university or company under a mentor. And essentially, what they will do is after the first semester, during their second semester, they will be able to write a science or engineering paper, whichever kind of specific topic they chose, and give a presentation. And then finally, one of the main benefits of the ASR Applied Science Research Program is that students will have the opportunity to have their paper be published in a science/engineering journal, which is definitely very beneficial. Most students don't have the ability to get published in a scientific journal until grad school. You even have to get lucky to get one in undergrad. So the ability to have one published in high school is definitely a very good benefit for students who are interested in science research to get ahead of their peers and get interested in this topic before college. And then they also have their biotech research program, where students learn lab techniques in subjects such as molecular biology, biochemistry, immunolocalization, and cell culture. And for this program, they'll design and carry out independent research projects, either in school or in a lab at a local academic lab. And then thirdly, Menlo also has interdisciplinary and personalized scholar program, which is their Menlo IP. And essentially the main goal for this is that it is designed to allow students to form a more personalized approach to their studies, so they feel like they can get more out of it and it's more for them, similar to Nueva in a small aspect, but definitely different. There are three kind of concentrations that they have, which they kind of compared to college concentrations. One is arts and letters, which focuses more on writing and kind of critiquing scholarly writings. And then they have citizenship and leadership, which is more focused on public policy. And then community engagement and impact, which focuses on looking in the community and trying to be a problem solver for the issues that are in the community or in society. And then lastly, I do want to have a notable program, which is their Global Online Academy. Very quickly, this one is very interesting because it allows students to take fully online courses that are hosted by other institutions both domestically and internationally as well. It allows students to take classes that they probably wouldn't be offered in the Bay Area. So it allows them to broaden their learning scope and kind of get interested in topics that most students probably wouldn't be able to. So that's just a little introduction on their STEM focused and personalized programs. So now we'll get into some feedback from parents that we've seen. So here is a couple quotes. The first one said that we are in our second year at Menlo as a seventh grader. They are kind and they do many community projects from what I've seen. But since we did start from the pandemic, it is a little bit hard to say. So this parent is in their second year at Menlo. They started at the bottom grade in grade 6. They've had a good experience so far, but it's a little bit hard to say because they did start during the pandemic. And then the second quote is they admit a lot of siblings, around 50% of the class. There's a sibling admissions talk on with all that to say. It depends on how many siblings are applying that year. To give you an idea on how many spots are really open, Menlo wasn't a school that they actually thought they'd get into or get accepted, but they were able to actually get in. They hadn't visited yet, but their daughter definitely liked the school and they chose it when they're admitted. And then our third one is from attending all of the admission events, it's hard to say what they look for from year to year. It could be that they want to fill their drama or basketball team as their star players graduating, but they do look to even the class out with the amount of girls, boys, ethnicities, economic diversity, etc. We just tried to present as great of a kid as we have, but everyone else does that. So it does show that they do from this feedback that it is a little bit hard to get into if you don't have a sibling there, but there is a possibility, as the second parent did say, and they do seem to be happy at the school right now. So this is it for the second school of Menlo, but we'll get into our third school. And our third school here is Pinewood. So a brief introduction about Pinewood. One kind of key characteristic about Pinewood that we'll get into in the next slides is that they do have STEM programs and clubs available for all 3 levels, upper, middle, and lower school. But English, writing, and arts is definitely a specialty at Pinewood. Their address is located in Los Altos Hills. They have a campus for each level. For lower and middle school, it's in Los Altos, and then for upper school, it is located in Los Altos Hills. Their teacher to student ratio is 1:7, and for AP scores, 83% of the students received a 3 or higher on their AP test, and then the average score was 3.62. And then the main grade entrance was kindergarten, grade 6, and grade 9. For their tuition breakdown for grades K through 6, it is $35,785. For grades 7 and 8, it is $45,470. And then grades 9 through 12, it is $47,285. And then lastly, some admission rates for UC Berkeley and UCLA in 2019 to 2020. There was actually a pretty significant increase for UC Berkeley from 2019 and 2020, which is impressive. It went from 20% to 27.27%. And then for UCLA, it went up again as well by about 5% from 13.6 to 18.5. Now, for Pinewood's key characteristics, one thing that we do notice is that they do dedicate a lot of their resources towards their arts programs. They have multiple theater and performing arts extracurriculars on top of the standard arts classes. They do offer creative writing, and then they also offer a yearbook and so forth. And then another key characteristic that we noticed is that there is a specialized teacher for every class, and that starts from as early as kindergarten. And then there's also on top of that learning specialists that are at the school. They assist the students who are struggling, and then they also provide kind of backup support to teachers. They can kind of see if a specific student is struggling on a topic, and they can definitely brief the teacher, let them know, hey, the student seems to not be catching up with the other students in this topic. Let's spend more time on it with them so that their education path can get smoothed out. So these learning specialists are definitely good for helping not just the students, but the teachers as well. They do have summer camp programs for grades K-8 that focus on sports, arts, and technology, whichever your child is interested in most. And then one feedback that we did see from parents is that there is some focus on SEL that is in their curriculum, but it is not as in-depth as Nueva or Synapse, which we'll cover in a few minutes. So if you are a parent that has SEL, social emotional learning, as their number one or one of the top 3 aspects when considering a school, this is just something to keep in mind. But now we are going to get into some notable extracurriculars that Pinewood offers. And their number one top one is definitely their school newspaper, which is called the Perennial. It's awarded first place status in the American Scholastic Press Association contest/review. And then one key factor about this that is definitely positive, I would say, is that reporters are responsible for researching, interviewing, and writing the final copy of stories assigned to them, which is definitely great if your child is interested in writing, interested in journalism, becoming a journalist. This is very key because a lot of other schools, they will sort of, the teacher of the class will sort of hold their hand throughout the whole time, and they don't end up learning the fundamentals of journalism. So the fact that at Pinewood, the students who are writing these stories, they are responsible for all aspects of journalism, researching, interviewing, and writing the whole story. That will definitely prepare them for the future and in college, because they definitely do that in college. So this is definitely a very good program for people who are interested in journalism, and the awards definitely say so as well. And then they also have an annual literary arts magazine called Tabula Rasa. It's won awards as well. So they definitely have 2 kind of aspects for writing, which is their newspaper and their annual magazine. Now for STEM, they offer a couple STEM programs as well. For grades K-2, they have STEM Basics with Legos, where it's a weekly class to help them introduce the concepts of STEM through play. And then for grades 3 and 4, they have their Maker Club, which is where students learn STEM concepts in their Imaginarium Maker Lab. And the students who are in this club are able to participate in 2 competitions every year: the Cardboard Challenge Club in October, and then the Tech Challenge in April. One factor about this is that it is limited to the first 20 students. So if your child is interested in this club, make sure to get in early. However, 20 students is actually a lot more for Pinewood in comparison to other schools we're talking about, because Pinewood does have the lowest amount of total students, but definitely get in early. And then lastly, they have their technology club, which is for grades 7-12. And this is where students use STEM to create tech-based solutions in community problems. And club members also have the opportunity to participate in national and international competitions. So this is just a little bit of information on their STEM programs, as well on their top writing programs, such as the newspaper and the magazine. But now we'll get into some feedback from parents. And so this first quote says that Pinewood is a terrific school for college prep. 2 of our children currently attend Pinewood, but we have had another child graduate from our local public school, which was a very highly ranked one. They wanted to specify, but the difference was immense. The small class size and high level of teacher involvement, as well as general ethic of Pinewood, definitely made for a much better learning experience for their children than the local public high school. So this parent definitely felt that Pinewood was worth it in comparison to their local public high school, based off the 2 kids that did attend Pinewood. And then the second quote said, the school's biggest advantage would be the student body. Everyone is very close, and if you are new, it's quite easy to make friends and cement them. This is basically because Pinewood has a small population, but it is very easy to be a tightly knit community. And when you do make friends, you can keep them for a long time. And then this last one says that the facilities at Pinewood are great, but they do think that they can be better. Most of the buildings were built in the 50s, and they do show their age, but Pinewood does do a good job to upkeep and modernizing where they can. So hopefully this feedback is a little bit helpful. But before we move on to our fourth school, I just want to make a very short announcement. Obviously, there's a lot of information that we cover in these schools. It's very hard to kind of compare and contrast all the schools. It's definitely a tall task to figure out which school is right for your child. And also, obviously, this presentation alone may not be enough for you to decide, or maybe the school that you want is not listed today. So I just want to briefly shout out that we do have free one-on-one consulting sessions through our Calendly link. You can do so by scanning the Calendly page right there. We definitely provide one-on-one personalized assistance to help you make that decision for your child. When you make an appointment, around 1 to 2 days before the appointment, we will send out a survey that will allow you to write down everything about your child, what schools that you are considering, and we'll make sure to give the most detailed answers possible when receiving that information during our one-on-one consulting session. Like I said, the first 30-minute session is free for anyone who wants to schedule one. You can do so by scanning that QR code, or if you are unable to scan the QR code right now, you can personally message me through this meeting. Your email, make sure it's through me, not everyone, but the personal private message, and we will collect those emails, and then tomorrow we will reach out to you with the consulting link. So if you would like to do that, that would be great. We will also have this QR code out at the end of the presentation during our Q&A session. But let's get into our fourth school, which is Crystal Springs. And so a brief introduction about Crystal Springs is that they do have a lot of study abroad opportunities, which we'll talk about in the characteristics slide. And then there is 2 campuses, one for Belmont, California for the middle school, and then Hillsborough for high school. They are similar to Menlo, where they do have a grade 6 through 12 system. They don't have elementary school. Their teacher to student ratio is 1 to 9, and 76% of teachers hold advanced degrees. Their main grade entrance is 6 and 9, and their average GPA is 3.87 unweighted. And then lastly, their tuition is the same for all grades, 6 through 12. It is $54,445. 54. And then for their UC admission rates for 2019 and 2020. For UC Berkeley, there was a decrease. It went from 32.26% down to 18.75%. And then the UC admission database did not have information for 2020 UCLA, but in 2019, it was 21.21%. Next, for their key characteristics, they do have a detailed social emotional learning program, and the focus of that social emotional learning program is on conflict management, resolution, and empathy. And then one other thing that they stress on is making sure that students are living a balanced life, making sure that they are not only working hard, studying their academics, but also pursuing other hobbies outside of school as well. They focus on mindfulness education and helping students become aware of their mental health or stress levels, which kind of connects to the balanced life, because if students are living a balanced life, their mental health will be good, while their stress levels will be low. And then another one is that the school no longer offers AP courses. Instead, they're replaced with what they're called design honors or H classes. Around 16 to 17 of their AP courses were converted to this system a couple years ago. And this is to make sure that the teachers at the school have the ability to change the curriculum slightly to focus more on group work and project-based learning, because they believe that that will help students get more out of those classes. And just because they don't offer AP courses doesn't mean they can still take AP classes. They take AP tests. A lot of students can still take AP tests at Crystal Springs and do well. Next, Crystal Springs, one key characteristic that we talked about in the initial slide is their study abroad program, which is called Global Initiatives Program. For this one, students are able to study abroad and gain real world experiences. It provides them with either short-term study trips or even international internships. Some of the countries that they've gone to over the last couple of years include China, Peru, France, Costa Rica, Canada, India, Spain, Morocco, Germany, Zambia, and Botswana. And one example of their global initiatives program is that all eighth graders have the ability to travel to a specific country that is based on the language that they're currently studying in school. So for Spanish, they go to Costa Rica. For French, they go to Quebec. And then for Mandarin, they go to Shanghai. One note is they did go to Iceland last year. The Mandarin students did because of the COVID protocol. But as you can see here, one of the main kind of focuses for Crystal Springs is they do emphasize the importance of learning through different cultures, through different experiences, and making sure to give students the opportunity to study abroad, because it is hard to plan and find the resources to make these trips possible. So Crystal Springs does their best to provide that for the students, because they believe that broadening the scope of learning culturally will definitely help them out in the future. And it's obviously a very fun program. But now we'll get into some feedback from Crystal Springs parents regarding Crystal Springs. And so the first quote here says that the junior level schools have more young teachers and new administrators, as well as more classes and a wider range of academic fields. However, the high school teachers are also great. So this parent was definitely more satisfied with the middle school program, but also that the high school program was good too. The second quote says, my son has just entered grade 6 and he is very happy at school every day. The teachers are very enthusiastic and professional. In addition, the students are friendly and love learning, but they do think that the sports curriculum and food need to be strengthened. So this parent definitely says that the sports program is not as strong in comparison to other schools like a Menlo, but their student who is in grade 6 is very happy at it. So those are just two kind of things to keep in mind. And then this last one says that Crystal Springs prepares your child really well for college. The one challenge that there isn't as much flexibility early in high school, since everyone takes mostly the same thing. You can choose your language and your art, but that's about it. So this parent thought that around the freshman and sophomore school range, there wasn't as many options, not as much personalized education as in comparison to a Nueva or a Menlo in some instances, but it did help them prepare the student very well for college. So hopefully this feedback is a little bit helpful on Crystal Springs, but we're going to get into our final school now. Oops. And our final school here is Synapse. And so a brief introduction on Synapse is that there is a big emphasis on social emotional learning. They focus very heavily on this aspect, and we'll get more into that in a second. And then there's also a large focus on project-based learning for math especially. And so the location of Synapse is Menlo Park, and then the teacher to student ratio is 1 to 5. And for the tuition breakdown for kindergarten, it is 33,600, and then for grades 1 through 4, it's 35,700, and then for grades 5 through 8, it's 39,900, so slightly under 40K. And then the main grade entrance is kindergarten in grade 6. Now for some key characteristics about Synapse, they do have project-based learning through their Math Circles activity program, and that is for the lower school. And essentially what the Math Circles activity is that it's a 30-minute session once a week where students are able to pick a topic that they are interested in that's obviously math related and practice that in a project-based learning system or setting. And the topics that are offered include geometry, computational paper folding, mathematical art, sports statistics, strategy games, and mathematical puzzles. So one thing that you can see that they're trying to encourage for their lower school students is trying to make sure that the students are getting interested in math through topics that they may be interested in. Like we mentioned, sports statistics is one of those topics. If this child is interested in sports but may need some more help learning, getting interested in math, that can definitely help. Having them introduce statistics through sports or strategy games, that is definitely one thing that they push. And then for the middle school students, they are able to participate in math competitions such as the AMC 8, the Math Olympiad, and Math Counts through their mathletics team. And then for parents, one of the key characteristics is that parents are actually able to participate bi-monthly in their emotional intelligence or EQ sessions. And the goal essentially of this is to help them navigate the waters of parenting and learn from other parents and EQ experts that are present during those emotional intelligence sessions, because they do realize that social emotional learning is important for both students and parents. There's a lot of struggles that happen with parenting. They want to make sure they're there to help and make sure that they can also build a tightly knit community through talking with other parents as well during these sessions. So those are some characteristics regarding Synapse that were definitely made them stand out. So we will get into the next slide, which is their SEL. As we said before, they are definitely very focused on SEL. They actually follow the same 6 seconds SEL curriculum as Helios. And for parents who do not know, 6 seconds is one of the most renowned social emotional learning curriculums that is very highly thought of and very detailed. So we'll get into that for a little bit for the next couple minutes. They follow the 8 competencies that 6 seconds provides. And these 8 competencies that they focus on for the child include enhance emotional literacy, recognize patterns, apply consequential thinking, navigate emotions, engage intrinsic motivation, exercise optimism, increase empathy, and then pursue noble goals. Those are the 8 kind of competencies that they focus on in their curriculum. And then as you can see on the graph to the right, they do a lot of those competencies are shown in their 5 key pillars of social emotional learning, which they include. And those are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, social awareness, and relationship skills. Moving on, they do also have emotional intelligence assessments to personalize the SEL development of their child and help them set academic and social emotional goals. K through 6 students participate in self-science classes, where students through experiments and through activities, they learn to help better their own communication and social emotional wellness. And then lastly, middle school students take social innovation classes that have full SEL integration. So as you can see with Synapse, they do pride themselves and focus more on their SEL and making sure their curriculum is in depth and covers every single aspect and has kind of sub aspects to the main key pillars to make sure that each child is personally able to help improve their social emotional learning. And then lastly, we'll get into some parent feedback regarding Synapse. And so the first quote here is, if your child is gifted, it can be a good fit, better than some other private schools in some senses. There will be other gifted kids there, and the project-based learning will appeal to them. And then the second quote here says, I think Helios and Synapse have sort of similar feels. Both are very strong communities and very strong SEL. As we said before, Helios and Synapse, both their main key characteristic is social emotional learning, and they follow the same curriculum. So for parents who know about Helios, which is located in Sunnyvale, but maybe in the Peninsula and don't want to drive so far to go to Helios, Synapse is definitely another option. And then this third quote is, we're at Synapse. The daughter is in 1st grade and our SEL curriculum is very strong. We have weekly specialized classes called self-science, as we said before, and it's part of the skill evaluation at the end of each trimester. And you can see it in all of the other classes as well. School also organizes classes and events for parents around SEL. That was the main reason why they chose this school. And then lastly, this is a paraphrase from a parent, not a direct quote, but this parent said that the project-based learning platform for math may limit students' abilities to get ahead and master topics that are above their grade level. So they do focus a lot on project-based learning. And if your child is definitely benefits from project-based learning, it's definitely a good option. However, if you do want your student to maybe get very far ahead in math and take classes that are 2 or 3 grades ahead of their actual class, it may be a little bit harder here because of the focus on project-based learning over hard tests to gauge their improvement. So that is it for our 5 schools individual presentations, but we will now get into some key statistical comparisons for a couple minutes. So the first one is the UC Berkeley admission. And as you can see here, Pinewood did receive the biggest increase by about 7%, and then Crystal Springs saw the biggest decrease by about 14%. However, after 2020, Nueva's was the strongest at around 28%. And then for UCLA, it's a little bit incomplete due to the UC admissions database, but Nueva, again, after 2020 is the strongest at around 25%, but Pinewood and Menlo saw good increases as well from 2019 to 2020. And then Crystal Springs, we don't have 2020's numbers, but in 2019, it was strong at over 20% as well. And for their ACT scores, Pinewood was slightly lower at 31, but they are all very strong. Nueva is the strongest at 34, and then the other two, Menlo and Crystal Springs, have 33. And then for their SAT scores, again, all very strong, but Nueva was the only one at above 1,500 at 1,503, while Pinewood was the only school at under 1,400 at 1,380. And then lastly for the academic comparison statistics is their national merit semifinalists. As you can see here, there definitely is a huge discrepancy here between Menlo and Pinewood, but one thing to take into consideration here is that Menlo has the most students in their senior class at 144, while Pinewood has the least at 49, while Nueva has 91 and Crystal Springs has 83. So that's something to take into consideration. The more students, the more chances at the national merit semifinals, but Menlo did have the highest at 16, while Pinewood was the lowest at only 1. So that's definitely to take into consideration if this category is important to you. But now we'll move on to their tuition statistics. So really quickly right here for their elementary school, Nueva had the highest at 53,350, which is at 40,000, and then Pinewood and Synapse were at around 35,000 each. But one kind of thing to note here is that for Nueva, for G5, it is 53,000 from G5, and then Synapse is 33,600 from K, and then right under 40,000 for G5, because some schools, they don't have their tuition completely set, lower school, middle school, upper school. It's kind of individualized based off how they feel. Then next is their middle school. And so as you can see here, Synapse is the only school that is right under 40,000 at 39,900, while Crystal Springs is slightly the highest at 54. And then Pinewood is a little bit above is around 45. And then Menlo and Nueva are at 53. And then for high school, as you can see, Pinewood is the only school at under 50,000 at 47,285. And the others are the same as in the other slides. Nueva, Menlo at 53,000 and Crystal Springs at 54,000. Now, this last slide for tuition we thought would be very helpful, because I know a lot of you parents are trying to decide which one is exactly right, and that you may want to mix and match, whether you want to go to one school for a little bit and then switch to the other, or go to a public school for a little bit and then switch to private. So here is the breakdown on the tuition for how much you would pay if you went from start to finish for each school. Obviously, Menlo, Crystal Springs, and Synapse will be the lowest because they don't have K all the way through 12. The lowest for K all the way through 12 out of these, the two schools here is Pinewood. It is around 500,000, and then Nueva is a little bit over 600,000. So our last slide here will just help you out a little bit. It is our Peninsula School summary, just to give you guys a summary, because there is a lot of information to cover here. This is just a key takeaway for each school to take into consideration. So for Nueva, key takeaway here is that it is a great option for students who need more personalized education. And then for Menlo, it is definitely a fitting school for students who are also into arts and sports on top of other academics like math and English, but they also are students who want to get ahead in science-based research fields as well, as we talked about. They're two very good programs. And then for Pinewood, it is an excellent school for students who have a passion for writing and performing arts, as we saw from their newspaper and their magazine. And it's also a good school for students or parents who want more of a smaller, deep community connections, because it does have the lowest population out of all of the other schools. And then for Crystal Springs, it is definitely a great choice for students who are into studying internationally and want to take part in their global initiatives program. And then lastly, for Synapse, it is definitely recommended for parents who prioritize SEL and project-based learning. So hopefully this chart is a little bit helpful for you. We definitely will be sending all of the slides, if you're interested in, for this PowerPoint in our follow-up email tomorrow. We have all the emails from Eventbrite. We'll send all of the slides, so you won't miss anything here. But now we'll get into some Q&A in a second here. We're at our Q&A slide. As we said before, if you do have more questions and we can't get to them, you can definitely join our Bay Area school group and receive detailed answers just by scanning the QR code below. And then we also have our one-on-one consulting session. If you do want to learn more about a specific school and want a one-on-one consulting session on that school, QR code there as well. And then just a little sneak peek, we do have an upcoming webinar on Wednesday, December 15th at 6 p.m. PST. So it'll start an hour before this one did. And this one's math focused for any parents that are interested in math. We have our webinar on the best middle school math competition deep dive, which is it'll talk a lot about the AMC8, how to prepare for it, what to expect, and all of the aspects of the AMC8, how your student can perform well on it. We have our math specified consultant who will give that presentation for that webinar. So stay tuned for that if you are interested. But now I will get into a couple questions. We have a question here. It says, will this video be available and viewed again? Yes, it will be available and viewed again. We do have a recording of this webinar that will be posted on YouTube, and we will email you the webinar recording. And also, if you join our Bay Area Parents Discussion Facebook group, you can see it there as well from our Facebook live stream and also from the YouTube recording. And then pretty sure you saw my answer before where the slides, they will be shared afterwards as well. That is okay. I do not see any other questions for this webinar. So, oh, I do see a new message. So if the student wants to pursue STEM concentrated area, which schools are the better choice? It would really depend on what exact STEM field that you are interested in, but for the science, if you're interested in science research, I would definitely consider Menlo because it has those internship programs and the ability to get accepted in those scholarly journals, which is, I cannot stress enough how important it is to have that kind of experience early on and get ahead of students who are in undergrad and even grad school as well. Okay, and then this question is, do they offer scholarships? They do offer scholarships and financial aid. It is always on a case-by-case basis based off the parent's income, but there is a session where you do submit your financial aid application. That application is due in early January. It is January 7th. So if you are applying for Nueva this year, make sure to get that application in soon, and then they will give you back with an answer. So based off your income, they will show how much aid that you can possibly get. And I will let Judy take the rest of these.
Okay, since they use IQ tests to account for equality on race and national origin because IQ tests are racially biased. So basically, IQ tests will only be one metric for the entrance and for the application. So as long as your score is over 130, they will not look at it any longer. So actually, we don't need to worry a lot about the racial bias. And for the IQ test, mainly it's actually test your child's ability in terms of logic and like the spatial imaginations, and all those things are actually to test the potential of every kid. So we believe it can be fair for most of the children. And are there online tests to get an assessment of IQ before the actual IQ test? The policy is that for both Nueva and Hacker, they do not or we can say they forbid any like a real preparation for the IQ test. They want to see the real ability of the child. So we actually don't recommend parents to find the IQ test papers beforehand. What we can do is that for the parents, we can go through the IQ test papers and to see what abilities or skill set are needed. And we can use other practices, for example, to watch the YouTube videos or any other practice book to let our children have a basic idea about that. How much is a yearly donation for different schools above tuition? So it actually varied a lot, and the average line for Harker is about like 2,000. An ideal time to apply for these schools. My kid are in the pre-K to 8th grade school now. Is it better to switch at middle school, or is waiting for the after middle school better? So what we can see is that if we want to join Nueva or Harker, like for example in the 9th grade, the competition will be super intensive because there are so many middle schools that end at the 8th grade, and all of those students will looking for a new or looking for a new high school. And in that case, at that stage, there are a lot of or more than there will be the most students to compete for the spots in Nueva. Can you please explain the slides that said only 2% of the kids with over 130 in Nueva? So actually that will be a spectrum for the average or for the IQ for all the children, and we can say it is average IQ score for children will be around like 100. And in that case, if the requirement for Nueva is 130, it actually makes sure that the children be chosen will be at the top 20 or top 2% of all the children who took the IQ test. Okay, and if you have any questions, we can actually to go back to our Facebook group, and we will be there waiting for you to have any questions or discussions. And you can also reach out with us in our Facebook or as well as in our emails. Thank you for coming.